0-calorie sweetener linked to heart attack and stroke. Study finds. This from CNN. A sugar replacement called erythritol, used to add bulk to sweeten things like stevia, monk fruit, and keto-reduced sugar products, has been linked to blood clotting, stroke, heart attack, and death, according to a new study. Quote, the degree of risk was not modest, said the lead study author, Dr. Stanley Hazen, director of the Center for Cardiovascular Diagnostic and Prevention at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner Research Institute. People with existing risk factors for heart disease, such as diabetes, were twice as likely to experience a heart attack or stroke if they had the highest levels of erythritol in their blood, according to the study published Monday in the journal Nature Medicine. Quote, if your blood level of erythritol was in the top 25% compared to the bottom 25%, there was about a twofold higher risk of heart attack and stroke. It's on a par with the strongest of cardiac risk factors like diabetes, Hazen said. Additional lab and animal research presented in the paper revealed that erythritol appeared to be causing blood platelets to clot more readily. Clots can break off and travel to the heart, triggering a heart attack, or to the brain, triggering a stroke. And then we've got other articles here, one from Fox. We've got the actual study. There's a bunch. This made a bunch of waves. What are these studies actually saying? What is he say? It sounds like if I'm eating things that have erythritol, I am massively elevating my risk of stroke and heart attack. Is that what they're saying?
I mean, this definitely grabbed me at first, just like first look, I'm like, wow, so we'll get to some of the nuances of this, but I mean, I think you summed it up. But basically, if you're in the top 25% of a cohort of people with existing risk factors, now that has its own issues when you're studying only people with risk factors, but again, we'll get into some of that. Such as diabetes, one of the major risk factors for a cardiovascular event. If you're in that top 25%, you have a twofold higher risk of heart attack and stroke than if you're in the bottom 25%. I mean, that's pretty. That's I think the gist of the study to me. Yeah. So, and then they kind of dabbled in, well, we're going to show that clotting is the cause of this, and we're going to show that by using platelet-rich plasma and very high concentrations of erythritol, putting them in a petri dish together and seeing if the clotting increases, which they did see. Now, again, I don't want to keep going off in different tangents. There's issues with that. With the study. I mean, platelet-rich plasma by the name, you can tell is not exactly how things are in your blood. It's platelet-rich version of that. Right. So you've got way higher platelets, and then you've got this concentration that is way higher, even that was in the highest 25% cohort that they found. Then they use some mice models, which is notoriously bad for studying cardiovascular disease anyway, and humans. It's just a very poor model. So you've got those issues that again we'll kind of go over again because I think they're critical. But yeah, it's essentially saying that if you're taking your erythritol, that you're going to have much higher risk of a heart attack and stroke. I think that's the gist of the study.
I eat a modified diet. I have not a lot, but I have more than 0 erythritol in my diet. This is concerning,
and I think that's key too. Just to take a minute, I don't want to turn this into like a science class. But I just think there are a few basic points of what erythritol is. Mm-hmm. It's a sugar alcohol or a polyol. Okay, it contains no sugar or alcohol. So you have to remember, alcohol is we immediately think of it as maybe isopropyl, or of course the alcohol that's in beer and whiskey. Right, but it's really just a chemical term. Okay, and ethyl alcohol or isopropyl alcohol is the manifestation that we use and just call alcohol. So it's a sugar alcohol. It's got a bunch of OH groups. And again, I don't want to get too technical, but that's really all it is. Okay. It's a non-nutritive sweetener. Okay. It essentially has no calories. One source you read will say no calories. The other sources will say more specifically 0.2 to 0.4 calories a gram, which the FDA standards allow you to round down to 0. But functionally, that's very low. You're talking 0.2 calories per gram of this stuff. Even if you're eating 30 grams of it, you're still talking pretty negligible. And what was interesting is that it does not spike your blood sugar at all. So a carbohydrate, you take it in, and your body, essentially it causes a blood sugar spike in your body to some varying degree at some varying time, which is where you get into the different carbs and the multigrains and the white breads, etc. So even though it's technically a carb, it is in the fiber category where you can subtract it out.
Oh.
So if there's a total amount of carbs, you would be able to subtract out something like erythritol because it doesn't cause those blood sugar spikes.
So that's why it's used in all these foods.
Yes. And the other reason is it's got physical properties like sugar. So it's used for the bulk and the mouthfeel of sugar.
Okay.
But it's only 60% is sweet. So that's why and I think it's critical to say that you tip in a lot of foods, especially like Halo Top ice cream or different things that we're eating that are now pretty cutting edge. Yep. They have a lot of erythritol in it. You are talking high amounts. So again, that's why it kind of grabbed me at first, because this is a new hot thing. It's in all these like cutting edge foods that is all in these low calorie foods. And, so it definitely grabbed me, at least initially. So it is found in small amounts in fruits and vegetables, very small amounts. So it is natural in that sense. But the way it's made industrially, because you need these higher amounts, it's typically made from corn. They're finding ways to make it from pears, et cetera, but it's really made from corn.
Yeah.
And it ends up the same product. So it's one of those technicalities. It's a natural sweetener that's artificially derived.
Right.
Because it ends up the same chemical that's in the Halo Top ice cream that you're eating or in the sweet is the same thing that's in the fruit, just in wildly different amounts.
Right.
There are some theories that exist, and we can go into some of this, that similar to some of the other artificial sweeteners, that you are dealing with a brain gut response, some brain signaling, that you're still taking in something sweet, and that is tricking the brain. And then it can lead to some impaired insulin sensitivity, some reduced insulin sensitivity,
Interesting,
increased insulin resistance, and increased food craving and weight gain. So you hear a lot of people, the Halo Top, they're eating the whole pint, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Part of it's psychological because you feel like you can. But, is there some of this going on, the brain gut signaling, where you're taking in something sweet, the body believes it's sugar, the brain believes it's sugar, there is a brain gut relationship. So I didn't go into that in real depth.
Right.
But I think that is something that's always kind of out there when you're talking about these artificial sweeteners themselves. They're never as innocent, even in the sugar alcohol way, which seems like the best way to do it.
Right.
In terms of something like the hardcore chemicals like aspartame.
Yeah.
That's still out there, I would say. Then lastly, to kind of wrap this up, bloating, flatulence, gas. There's varying things. Some people don't believe you're going to have that unless you're eating, because you can kind of calculate your tolerance to it. You can really, it's 1 gram per kilogram or 0.45 grams per pound of erythritol per body weight. So 150 pound person theoretically can eat 68 grams, we'll say, of erythritol without flatulence. People will swear that's not the case. But again, you get to the whole thing, you're eating the whole pint, et cetera.
Right.
So that's also out there. And that's going to be, I think, a varying response. I don't think you can go with calculations like that when you're talking about a symptom. Some people are going to have some flatulence and gas with it at lower amounts than other people.
That's fine.
Yeah.
But if it's going to kill me, how about I don't eat it? Am I going to die from this?
I think, this segues us into the big, I think that's what Joey was kind of holding off and saying.
I appreciate it.
But firstly, I think that was a great introduction and overview of what erythritol is and, what it looks like in our day-to-day lives and in our diets and food products and all this kind of stuff. It's everywhere at this point.
Yeah.
And I was guilty of eating the entire tubs of Halo Top.
Especially initially when it came out.
I titrated my dose of Halo Top up until the gas cleared out an entire room. So, all my roommates can attest to that.
It doesn't help that on the side of it says serving size, whatever, a half a cup, 4 servings, but then right next to it also says entire pint and has all the nutritional facts right there.
I think the entire calories is on the front too. Like it's just like prepping you to eat that whole thing.
Yeah. I totally can eat this whole thing. This is totally okay.
Yeah, man, it is funny to
Don't
think.
do that.
It is funny to think, like in college, I mean, I still drink a lot of like energy drinks now, Monster energy drinks and stuff, but Quest bars, those protein bars filled with erythritol.
Yeah.
I'd have an energy drink or two for studying for the gym, decent amount of erythritol. And then at night, we'd watch Game of Thrones. I'd eat an entire tub of Halo Top, which is 20 grams of erythritol. So I was like, I think like 2016, I was like the king of erythritol, basically.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised you're still alive. I mean, based on this study.
Yeah. So basically, the big turning point or distinction or kind of change in understanding of this whole thing, in addition to erythritol being found in food products, our body makes erythritol, We produce it endogenously. And so what this study failed to do was actually account for any sort of dietary consumption. Like they weren't measuring how much people were consuming at baseline. There was basically none of that. And also a lot of, experts not involved in the study, they made the point that erythritol at the time of the start of like some of these cohorts, erythritol wasn't even really being used that frequently as a food additive. So realistically, there wasn't really the potential that people were consuming such crazy high amounts, at the inception of this.
So you're saying that this study was probably just measuring endogenous erythritol, erythritol that people's own bodies were producing because our bodies produce it. Mm-hmm. That's what it was actually measuring, and it had nothing to do with their diet.
And one of the ways in which we produce glucose has the byproduct, because they are chemically similar. Mm-hmm. So it's a byproduct of one of the ways in which we produce glucose, pentose pathway. So it's, that's the technical term and mechanism for how.
Yeah. Basically, the study gives us no ability to determine if dietary consumption of erythritol is what is contributing to these major adverse cardiovascular events. So essentially what it's reaffirming is that when you're looking at a, metabolically sicker population, and I know that's sort of a crude way to describe it, but look, I mean, this is a patient population that has generally much higher average BMIs. There's higher instances of diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease, heart failure, history of heart attacks. I mean, it's all listed in there. So this is
all those comorbidities come together often.
Yes. It's generally older populations.
Yep.
So you're dealing with the cohort who was at much higher risk of these events to begin with. And so we know that circulating blood levels of erythritol, it's an artifact of a cohort like this. So sort of the more oxidative stress, the sicker, so to speak, that somebody is, the more likely that you are to see these higher circulating levels of erythritol. And so it's not that there's not any sort of input from dietary erythritol. It's just that the study
didn't measure it.
It fails to kind of determine any of that.
Wow.
And so to go back to some of the top hits on a Google search: artificial sweetener erythritol linked to increase in heart attacks, strokes. Sweetener erythritol may increase risk for stroke, blood clot, death. So it is crazy and unfortunate to see that linked back to those sorts of things. Again, the erythritol is more of an artifact of somebody that is already dealing with a great deal of metabolic stress. They have these underlying comorbidities, and like Joey said, what happens with the pentose phosphate pathway, essentially, it's one of the pathways where glucose is metabolized. Erythritol is just among many one of the notable byproducts, and so central adiposity, or having increased body fat, there's the potential for increased erythritol in circulation from that alone. Let alone if somebody has hyperglycemia, that's a whole other sort of risk to have increased erythritol in the blood. So what you're seeing is something that essentially just kind of makes all the sense. That there's virtually no way to determine that this is being caused.
Yeah, and I think that's a critical point. The actual quote, we found that the concentration of erythritol was higher in the group with higher glycemia. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm going to infer that the group with higher glycemia not only has a higher risk of a heart attack and stroke, that they're not consuming a lot of erythritol.
Right.
Because, I mean, certainly, yes, if a lower amount of blood glucose intake or carb intake of somebody whose insulin response is impaired is going to have a higher level. Yes, I don't, their body's not going to process it as well as somebody without diabetes. I get that. But in general, to generalize, they've got a higher risk because they have it, and they probably are not consuming entire gallons of Halo Top ice cream.
Right.
Okay. So versus the group with lower glycemia at study baseline. So I think that's critical. So it's more of an after marker of risk than it is a predictor. And if you lower your erythritol level somehow or intake, that then you're going to lower your risk. It's just a marker after the fact. It's,
Joey mentioned it at the outset, was that they also tried to look at platelet aggregation, like in a very in a mechanistic way. And so
they had an idea of what was causing this. Mm-hmm. They've decided, so now they're going to test it.
Yeah, and so that was a huge part of it. And yes, they were able to see that, you know, platelet aggregation, which is a, you know, huge step in clot formation in the body. They saw that was apparent with, you know, very high concentrations of erythritol. But we also know that there are a multitude of other platelet aggregation studies unrelated to this, in, you know, when viewed in this mechanistic or petri dish sort of setting, that they're just not always applicable to what happens in the body.
Yeah.
And so it was just like, they just kind of like, it was just a double down on something that we can't really use.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
and again, I know I said it before, but again, they used platelet rich plasma, which is an extract of the blood that's platelet rich.
Yeah.
And then they used extremely high concentrations, much higher than we're even in the highest percentage of the cohort. So again, you're setting it up for an unnatural.
So if you're shooting up erythritol, you might be causing yourself some problems, but eating a serving of that.
And I think, hey, even though we feel like it's essentially debunked, there's some smoke here, if you want to say, okay. Mm-hmm. And I still think that it goes back to moderation. That the whole, I always keep hitting on Halo Top here, but it is the one that stands out to me. That maybe entire boxes of erythritol confections and entire pints of. Maybe just something that you don't want to do. That we're still going to always believe in moderation. Yeah, if you're getting 30 grams of erythritol, I don't know. That's still a ton of one substance. And so if there's any smoke here at all, it still just maybe goes back to whatever you're doing, moderation is still the way to go.
Exactly. And then there's even studies showing that there are some modest benefits from having a little bit of erythritol in your diet.
Really?
You know what I mean? So you look at it, there are studies that show that it has positive effects on body weight and hemoglobin A1C, you know, massive things, but that doesn't also mean that you use 16 packets every time you try to sweeten a drink or something. It's I don't know. It is a shame that there's really not a ton to do with that you can really do with this. And then also with a lot of these nutritional type studies, it also is a matter of like, what are you replacing with? Are you like, if you're replacing saturated fat in your diet, are you replacing it with more bread, more cereal, or are you replacing it with, you know, monounsaturated fats? Or are you replacing it with avocado and different nuts and different oils? Like, you know, the same question applies here, is that you would be hard pressed to find many negatives for somebody who were to replace a lot of their sugar sweetened beverages with a beverage that's mainly sweetened with something like erythritol. You know what I mean? Because you inherently are decreasing that person's consumption of added sugars on a given day. So all of that's to say, it matters what you're replacing it with. Yeah. You know, if you're just adding a ton of erythritol to a diet that's already high in sugar and such, I mean, that's probably not the best thing aside from all this. Right. But replacement's always key. Context is always key with, you know, nutritional related interventions.
That's a big point. Absolutely.
I mean, hey, there are other sweeteners too. Yeah. I mean, xylitol, not safe for animals and such, but in general, you can use xylitol. You can use allulose. You can use stevia. There's monk fruit. There's combinations, like Truvia is a combination of erythritol and stevia. So even just micromanaging this whole sweetener thing a little further, I mean, you can mix up your sweeteners. Don't always drink Monster. You know, have a coffee and mix some stevia in it.
Well, just like, really don't always drink Monster, I think, is the punchline here. But